Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first virtual speaker series session. My name is Amelia D'Souza, and I am the Marketing and Communications Manager at the Ontario Produce Marketing Association. Today, we are joined by Lisa Covens from Leger for part one of our segment titled Adapting to Change, Marketing in the Age of COVID-19. With over 19 years of marketing research experience, Lisa Covens is a highly respected professional. As a vice president at Leger, Lisa manages the communications and public affairs practice and is a senior member of the Toronto office. She is well versed in both quantitative and qualitative research methods and is a security cleared federal government moderator. Today, Lisa will be speaking about consumer behavior during and after the pandemic. Without further ado, I will pass the floor to Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So obviously, a lot has happened in the past 2 months, and it's definitely changed us. It's changed the way we think, the way we act, how we're spending money, what we're doing. So at Leger, we got right into tracking behavior right away when this all started. We started doing a weekly national COVID survey among Canadians, so 1,500 Canadians weekly. We added in a US sample starting on March 24th. So they were a couple of weeks delayed from us. But yeah, each week we do this tracking. And what's interesting is at the beginning when we started tracking this weekly, I kept thinking this isn't fast enough. Like like things are changing so quickly. They're changing like every 12 hours. Like I feel like by the time we get the data, it's already too old. But in the end, honestly, like now weekly is a perfectly fine time period, and you can't really go faster than that with a big study. So we're definitely, the weekly is working well. We also just finished a second wave of a consumer behavior syndicated study. So some of the results I'm sharing are from both of those. What else we're doing at Leger on COVID-19, we're doing some tracking, some WHO tracking for World Health Organization, tracking for the Government of Canada, tracking for the Canadian Red Cross. We're also doing daily tracking for the Quebec government on COVID-19 and also daily tracking for the Alberta government. So we definitely have our ears to the ground. We did do a number of 24-hour studies for clients who needed to make decisions right away at the beginning. Feel like that's the urgency is like calmed a little since then, but we're still perfectly capable of doing a smaller sample overnight, but definitely ongoing stuff happening all the time. So what have we found? So we've been tracking fear from the beginning. Are you afraid of being infected by the COVID-19 virus? As you can see, like from March, it was a little bit lower, and then it kind of peaked beginning of April, and it's trending downwards a little bit. Having said that, in Ontario specifically, fear is a lot higher than in the rest of the country. We do have a lot of cases here in Ontario. We're the biggest province, so I can see why that's the case. 70% of Ontarians fear being infected by COVID-19. When we ask people as well if they're afraid that someone in their family will be infected by COVID-19, those numbers are higher. Everyone's much more fearful for the people close to them than they are for themselves. But then we also ask people, I'll get into more details about this in a few slides, how much they're adhering to rules around keeping social distancing and wearing masks in public and staying away from their friends and family if they don't live in their household. All of those behaviors that we're expected to do, that we're told to do, we're still finding that 39% are delinquent on at least one of those things. In Ontario, numbers are similar to the rest of Canada on that metric. So delinquency is going up, fear is going down. It won't be ideal when those two switch, because then we'll see that there's a rise in delinquency and hopefully not more new cases, but that could happen if people are obviously not adhering to the rules. So we asked this was a new question this week, which is quite interesting. To what extent do you find leaving your house and being out in public stressful? And 57% of Canadians are stressed when they leave their house. Stress is even higher among Americans than Canadians. Now, there's only in Canada 13% say they find it very stressful, but there is that big chunk of 43% who find it at least somewhat stressful whenever they're leaving their house. So in terms of the not following the rules, like I just mentioned, so 39% of Canadians are not following all of the guidelines. That's even higher among Americans. So 55% of Americans are not following all the guidelines that they should be. In terms of keeping a safe social distance, so we asked people if they've kept a safe distance when in contact with other people, and 96% said yes, they are intending to keep a safe social distance. But 51% report that someone outside of their family has come within 2 meters of them. And you hear this, you see this online, you hear it, you see it when you walk outside your door. People are walking past you and they get in your space, and people, back away, and they're not so happy with that. So even though people's outward intentions are to keep a safe distance, you can't always control what other people do. So they are reporting, seems like a disconnect, but they are reporting that, they are keeping a safe distance, but someone has gotten into their space. So where are we in terms of this crisis? We asked Canadians what statement best represents their personal opinion. And 27% think that the worst of the crisis is behind us. A quarter of Canadians feel that we are now in the thick of the crisis. We're at the worst of it right now. The highest amount, 30%, say the worst is yet to come. And another 17% actually don't know. They didn't know how to answer the question. They don't know where we're at in the crisis. These numbers were also similar in Ontario. But what we've found is, they will spend again. We asked, once governments lift the protective measures put in place to fight COVID-19, which of the following would you be comfortable doing? Top comfort was allowing in-home renovations, which I thought was interesting because I'm not even sure, I guess a lot of people are spending so much time in their home that they're looking around thinking of all of the things that they want to do to their house each day that something else grates on them that they're looking at. So people are really looking forward to having some work done. But the one that's relevant to OPMA would be going to farmers markets. 51% say they'll be comfortable going to farmers markets. That could be, I'm speculating here, but because a lot of farmers markets, not all, but a lot are outdoors, and people feel just generally safer being outdoors around other people that they don't know versus being in an enclosed environment. So then there's kind of a big jump downwards to shopping in a mall. Only 42% are going to be comfortable doing that. Even fewer are comfortable going back to their workplace or office, dining in restaurants, then a big jump down to flying on an airplane. We'll talk more about travel later. Going to school and daycare, only 19% feel comfortable with their kids going to school or daycare. Going to the gym or other fitness facilities. We've seen a lot about people working out inside their home and what the future of the gym looks like, and how people will maybe have to make an appointment at gyms that they typically just showed up to. Using public transit, also going to take a bit to get people comfortable, which plays into going back to your workplace or office, because at least in a Toronto environment, a lot of people take transit, or in a big city. Attending large gatherings seems not on the table for most, with only 14% saying they'd be comfortable, or traveling to the US, or going to bars, lounges, nightclubs, or pubs. When we asked the speed of easing measures, should the government be accelerating the speed? Is it happening at the right pace, or should it be slowed down? 57% feel that the ease measures are at the right place right now in their respective province. 31% feel that the pace should be slowed down, and only 12% are looking to accelerate that pace. So when we look at all the data and all of the work we've done publicly over the past 2 months, we found that there's 10 main trends to look out for that are happening or that are evolving. And the main overarching theme is that the money's still there, but it's changed pockets. People's behavior has changed. They might still be spending money, but spending it differently. So I'll give a personal example. My family tended to go out to eat quite a bit and has obviously stopped doing that. But now we're doing those meal boxes to kind of give us a different flair, some variety. So it's almost an equal amount of money, but it's changed hands. So there's an example, and that's just happening everywhere. So the first trend is that the crisis is a springboard for digital. So the current situation is leading Canadian consumers to adopt new online activities, which they intend to maintain for the most part over the long term. So we did a study that looked at all the different behaviors, some online, some not. But what we did find was that 55% of Canadians engaged in at least one online purchase behavior for the first time, or they've done that purchase behavior online more often during this crisis. Of those 55%, about a third or 18% say that they've engaged in at least one online purchase behavior for the first time. So some of these things include, doing virtual workouts or the click and collect, like any of those types of things that people might not have done before. Second key trend is that food and safety are key concerns. Cooking with basic ingredients is the fastest growing habit across the country. Other increased consumer behaviors include online health and beauty purchases, disinfectant product purchases, local product purchases, delivery services, drive-throughs, and click and collect. So we all know we've seen it all over social media, the baking trend, everybody's trying to get their hands on flour and sugar and yeast and all of these ingredients to make what they want at home. We all have obviously a lot more time on our hands to do these things, but also just like cooking with the basics, not cooking like a fast kind of pre-prepared meal because you're running to soccer practice or coming home from work late or whatever. Now people want to kind of start from scratch and eat healthier and eat with real food ingredients. The third trend is it's cool to be frugal. So 2020 is the new 2009. So the last economic crisis created a new savvy consumer who felt it was cool to be cheap. The mid-market obviously had pressure from that in retail, and they're getting even more added pressure from that. So what we found was that 32% say that they will reduce their spending on non-essential products and services in the next few months. This was higher among women and highest among 25 to 34-year-old shoppers, who I think tended to spend more on non-essential products and services to begin with, so they've curbed more than the other demographic groups. So the question is, like, who decides what is essential or not? And saving money just in case is the fourth trend. So for the first time in many people's lives, they've had to take a good hard look at their short-term savings. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty, so living paycheck to paycheck is just not that smart anymore. Not sure it ever was, but a lot of people did it. So now people are thinking, okay, well, maybe that's not a good plan right now. Maybe we need to be a little more smart about their short-term savings. The fifth trend is people buying in larger quantities. 26% said they adopted pantry loading during the crisis. We've all heard about the toilet paper and the mad dashes to get the toilet paper. Chicken was also another one that people were really hoarding at the beginning. Everyone has their thing that they're hoarding. I'm kind of a laundry detergent hoarder because I want to make sure I have the right kind in my house, and Kleenex for some reason is the the other thing that I hoard. But this will no doubt influence grocers and general merchandisers' pricing and promotion strategies. We know, we've seen that, you know, a lot of grocery stores and retailers had to say, like, no, you can only buy this many. So it was almost a reverse promotion for a while. And I think in some cases that's still happening. But we'll see how this plays out over the long term when the supply chain is, you know, a little more stable, or people have more faith in it and they're not worried and loading up for this apocalypse. The sixth trend is buying local, which will certainly be of interest to OPMA. 16% say they have bought more local products during the crisis. It's a little lower in Ontario at this point, at 11%, but that may change as the season for fruits and vegetables is growing over the next couple months. 53% intend to buy more local products from now on. So this crisis is producing a protectionist streak. This is not surprising, nor is it the first time. But without structured campaigns, improved signage, a concerted strategy, can it last? So we've seen, I'm not sure if you're keeping track of what's happening in Quebec, but that, I think it's called Buy Blue, is their big campaign to push for local purchasing and buying local products. So that's a big push. Our company is doing a syndicated project on that, all about, you know, what are people's intentions to buy local, what is the definition of a local product, which ones are more important to you to buy local versus buying outside of Quebec, which consumers value buying local. So that's a big thing in the Quebec population. And we might see that coming across the different provinces more to come. The seventh trend is that staycation. So 51% say they've canceled or changed their vacation plans. 8% still intend to keep their vacation as planned at this point. That remaining, I think it's 42%, said they didn't have a vacation planned to begin with. So they're kind of they're not moving one way or the other. But this term staycation was coined during the 2008-2009 economic crisis. And it's definitely coming back and is going to impact 2021 and beyond. So it's going to be a challenge, obviously, for the airline industry, but maybe local festivals, Q resorts by the lake may see this as an opportunity once things start to open up a little more. Again, we asked people if they would be comfortable. So in 2020, would you be comfortable taking a vacation you can drive to? So 2/3 said yes, they would take a vacation they could drive to rather than fly. Similar amount said they would be comfortable with taking a Canada-based vacation, but that dropped significantly to staying at a hotel or resort. Only 35% would be comfortable with that. A quarter say that they would be comfortable taking a vacation that does require them to fly, and the same amount would take a vacation abroad. 13% would be comfortable renting or buying a timeshare, and 12% would go on a cruise, which was a little bit surprising to me, to be honest. I don't even think they're operating anymore. So the eighth trend, we are entering the trust economy. So we're trusting each other, trusting ourselves, changing our behaviors to build trust in other people. Like I mentioned, 97% have practiced social distancing themselves. That number, the blue bars are the American numbers, the red, the Canadian. So the number's slightly lower in the US, keeping a safe distance between people, 96%. Are doing that in Canada, washing their hands more frequently. I feel like that was the push right at the beginning. We're not hearing that so much anymore. I'm not hearing wash your hands, I think is now ingrained in everybody's behavior and in their minds. Using their elbow to cough or sneeze, 92%. Kind of a big difference with Americans at only 84%. 86% say they've stopped going out except for necessities. This is one where the American number is way higher for wearing a protective mask in public areas. 79% are doing that in the US, but only 42% in Canada. But I think rules are starting to come in more about wearing masks in public, or they will be, and certain stores are requiring it. So I think we'll see that number start to rise in Canada over the next few weeks. And 21% of Canadians say that they have visited their friends or family. So they would be part of that delinquent group if they said that they're doing that behavior. Again, higher in the US. So who do we trust? Canadians mostly trust other Canadians at 87%. Americans also trust us. 75% of Americans say they trust Canadians. In Canada, we were asked about our trust for Dr. Theresa Tam. 70% say they trust her. 68% trust Dr. Anthony Fauci in the US. So the Americans were asked about him. Trust in the World Health Organization is higher in Canada versus the US. Our trust in our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is actually lower than the Americans' trust in Justin Trudeau, which is basically the same number. Overall, Canadians trust their elected officials more than Americans, but only half are saying they trust elected officials. 32% of Canadians trust Americans. 72% of Americans trust Americans. And only 40% of Americans trust Donald Trump, which is lower than our trust in Justin Trudeau. That number is quite low among Canadians. Canadians are not very trusting of Donald Trump. We also asked, to this day, are you satisfied or not with the measures put in place to fight COVID-19 by your provincial or your federal government? Doug Ford has a 79% satisfaction number, has dipped a little bit in the last couple of weeks, but that's quite good. I think most people would agree that he's, surprised some people over the past month in a positive way. 76%, even though trust overall in Justin Trudeau was lower, trust in the satisfaction or not with the measures put in place is higher at 76%. So Canadians will look for trusted, authentic, reliable, almost predicted brands and people coming out of this. But politically, this crisis favors the left here and abroad. Business relationships are also going to evolve, and being the biggest or the best won't necessarily be enough. So again, that, like I mentioned, the satisfaction with the provincial government has gone down overall across the country over the last week, even had a big 5% drop. So some things are changing. Different provinces are talking about opening up, and that might be what's playing into the dip in satisfaction for some people. The ninth trend is working from home is here to stay. And a lot of us are working from home. Only 9% say they're working from home for the very first time. But 26% say they're definitely working from home more often. And 79% are actually satisfied with this work from home scenario. So that's actually, that I think surprised our CEO when he saw those numbers. But also, I think different businesses are looking. I think Twitter released yesterday that they're planning to let their employees continue to work from home indefinitely, or at least over the next year or two. So we'll see what happens with that, and we'll see what happens to corporate real estate after that. Should be interesting. So the last trend is the the broken rituals. So what's going to happen to the business meeting, the long day of back-to-back meetings where you never actually work, the day trip to Montreal or Calgary or Ottawa, the business lunch that rarely makes a difference. We're all surviving without those things, or we've pivoted them in some way to make them still kind of happen. I mean, we're doing a lot more over Zoom and Zoom type platforms. So, maybe that will be the new ritual, but the ritual of in-person meetings is going to change, or it may not. People may crave them when we're back open and back in business as usual. So our study that I spoke about, we have consumer behavior during and after the pandemic. And this study, this syndicated study is more about behavior with respect to, shopping and purchase behavior and such. So that's available if interested. And then lastly, it's not the strongest of the species that survives or the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. So that's Darwin's quote. And we've, as Leger, we've often quoted this, and now more than ever, it seems particularly appropriate.
So the first question I had for you was, you mentioned that in your presentation, you mentioned that people will be looking for more predictable brands. So what characteristics of a brand do consumers associate with being predictable?
With being predictable?
Yes.
So we're not necessarily looking for something innovative as consumers right now. We're kind of looking for tried and true, something we love. Could be a regional brand. So for example, if you're looking at chicken, you might be looking when you're online shopping or doing your click and collect, you may look for a particular brand that you're familiar with, such as Prime or like another brand that you might like. Especially with a lot of people now online shopping for groceries. It's a different experience than if you're in the store and you can see things and feel them and touch them and look at them, that you may gravitate to those brands that you know for sure and can rely on. You may be less willing to try something new. So that's why you're not looking for that innovative, cool new type of cracker or whatever that like catches your attention when you're in the store, because online it may not be, innovation is maybe not where you're going at that point.
Right.
So you just want, a brand you can trust in the absence of that.
Right. And you also suggested that business relationships will evolve. How do you see this affecting small to medium-sized businesses?
So I definitely think that businesses are doing a lot more online, and I think the need to be nimble is really important right now. I can use our own business as an example. So Leger obviously is a large online panel, and we've been moving online for quite a while, but there still is a need to do telephone survey work, especially if you're calling into a particular township or you're calling a particular subset of the population. So we still do a lot of telephone interviewing from our in-person call center in our Montreal and Winnipeg office. Well, obviously, like overnight that changed, like the rules came through, especially in Quebec was seemed to be hardest hit right from the beginning. They, I think, still are. But one day the rule was, okay, you can have a call center, but you have to have people 3 stations apart or 2 stations in the middle or whatever. So they repurposed everything and they moved people around, and they started trying to put people from working from home and get people up and running in a way that, so IT was very busy trying to get people set up at home, but also in a way that we could still monitor them. So, that's part of our quality assurance, is to make sure that what they're reporting on the screen is the same thing as they're hearing on the phone. So they managed to do that with some of the staff and keep the in-person call center going. And then the next day they were like, nobody's allowed in the buildings. So you're done.
Right.
So we just had to, like, in order to keep our call center running, and we have a lot of big tracking studies, like transit studies, stuff like that, that rely on us calling every single day. And so we were able to switch it and get it up and running. And I know it was, a lot harder than it seemed, I'm sure, but it's fully operational now. And, the question going back is like, well, is there a need to have a huge, big call center room? And, maybe this is just a better option moving forward, because that old option in hindsight, like it's a lot of people in one room and touching the same stuff. And now, like, the thought of that is a little more concerning for people. So I think just the need to be nimble, also like use of Zoom, Skype, WebEx, Teams, all of those things, 83%. We did a survey a couple weeks ago where 83% said they're using some sort of video conferencing tools, and 42% are using them professionally. Among those using Zoom, 81% are using it more often. So I actually think, I would say I'm pretty tech savvy, except for that one moment a minute ago, because it went to my other screen. That's my excuse. But I don't know that I had ever used Zoom prior to this. I'd used other platforms like WebEx and, the older, clunkier ones. But now it's like all day long I'm on Zoom. So it's interesting. So the usage has gone way up. It's really impressive. Like my kids, they're in Zoom school all day, and my father grows dahlia plants randomly as a habit or as a hobby, probably not a habit. So my daughter's learning plants and growing and all that in her grade 3 class, and he was able to Zoom in and show the kids his whole like greenhouse and everything remotely, which is like, okay, for my 60 whatever year old dad was pretty impressive. And just the ability to do that is great, and to be nimble and grow. And so I think that's the main thing for businesses, small, medium, large enterprise, is just the ability to be nimble.
Right. Great. So my final question, it's a little long, so bear with me. In your presentation, you mentioned that people are becoming more frugal and taking a hard look at where they're spending their money. You also mentioned that there's an increase in the intent to buy more local product. So given, what we've seen with the cost of local product and the fact that it's expected to go up due to the many restrictions imposed on local producers and the lack of the available workforce, do you think that consumers will be willing to support local, even if it means having to pay a little bit more?
Yeah, so it all becomes a balancing act. So the types of products, our intentions to buy something local, there's really no magic number. But this is exactly, what we're looking at for that blue study I mentioned in Quebec. So what that's looking at is what's important. How much more are you willing to spend on a local product? Which local products? I think certainly for produce in Ontario, people are really tied to, for example, Ontario strawberries. And like, I know personally, I wouldn't care if they're 3 times more expensive, they're 10 times better. So it depends. But then, other products I may not be as discerning with, so I may be less willing. I guess it really depends on the person and the product and the willingness to spend more. But I think people are definitely have that in mind. And, it could also be the perception that if it's coming locally, it's not touching 25 people's hands on the way to get to me and all that.
Question. So thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of this particular session. Stay tuned for part 2, everyone, where we'll be joined by Nicole Marinick from Marin Marcoux Marketing and social media influencer Susan O'Keefe from Rhubarb and Cod. Thank you so much for joining me, Lisa.
My pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.